Imagine inheriting a house that holds every memory of your childhood, the laughter of your parents, the smell of your mother's roses, the creak of the floors that still whisper your family's story. Now imagine the person you trust most in the world taking it all away and giving it to someone else, without asking you. Welcome to Whisper's Story, where we unravel tales of betrayal, resilience, and the quiet strength we find in life's darkest corners. In today's story, we meet Emily, a 38-year-old woman who thought she had it all: a loving marriage, a stable life, and a cherished inherited house that was her last tie to her parents. But when her husband makes a decision that shatters her world, giving her beloved home to her own sister, Emily is left with nothing but a choice: fight for what's hers or forge a new path from the ashes of her old life. What would you do if everything you held dear was taken from you in a single moment? Stick with us as we follow Emily's journey through heartbreak, self-discovery, and the unexpected places we find strength. The house stood at the end of Maple Street, its white clapboard siding weathered by decades of sun and rain, a testament to time itself. Ivy crept up the porch railings, curling around the posts like nature's own embrace, and the garden out front bloomed with roses my mother had planted years ago, red and defiant even now. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the hardwood floors creaking underfoot as if whispering stories of the past. This was the house I inherited when my parents passed, a gift wrapped in memory and loss. It wasn't grand, just a two-story home in a quiet suburb outside Raleigh, but to me it was everything. The kitchen still held the echo of my father's laughter, the living room the shadow of my mother's knitting needles clicking late into the night. I'd walk through those rooms and feel them, their presence lingering in the chipped paint and faded curtains. When the lawyer called to tell me the house was mine, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, and cried, not out of sadness but relief. At 38, I'd built a life with Mark, my husband, in a sleek condo downtown, but this house was my anchor, a tether to where I'd come from. I imagined our future there, weekends spent fixing the leaky roof, maybe a child someday running through the backyard. It wasn't just a building, it was a promise I'd made to myself to keep my family's story alive. Mark didn't get it, not really. He'd nod when I talked about it, but his eyes would drift, already calculating something else. Still, I thought he understood it was mine, untouchable. The day I got the keys, I drove out alone, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. I stood in the doorway, breathing in that familiar scent, and felt a rare kind of peace. This was my place, my history. I didn't know then how fragile that peace would turn out to be. Have you ever inherited something that felt like a piece of your soul? What did it mean to you? The dining room table was an old oak beast, scratched and sturdy, a hand-me-down from my grandmother that had seen more family dinners than I could count. That night, it bore the weight of something else entirely. Mark sat across from me, his posture stiff, fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the wood. Sarah, my younger sister, perched at the end, her blonde hair spilling over her shoulders like she'd just wandered in from some bohemian dream. The chandelier overhead flickered, casting uneven light across their faces, and I remember thinking how normal it all seemed, until it wasn't. Mark cleared his throat, a sound that sliced through the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. He announced it like he was presenting a business deal. He'd decided to give the house, my house, to Sarah. The words hit me like a punch, sharp and sudden, knocking the breath out of my chest. He kept talking, something about Sarah needing a fresh start, how she'd been struggling since her last gig fell through, how the house could be her stability. His voice was calm, measured, like he'd rehearsed it. Sarah's eyes widened, darting between us, but she didn't protest. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, as if waiting for me to agree. I couldn't move. The room tilted, the walls pressing in, and all I could see was the house. My roses, my creaky floors, my parents' ghosts, slipping through my fingers. Mark didn't ask me, he decided. 12 years of marriage, and he'd drawn a line through my heart without even a glance my way. Sarah shifted in her seat, her lips parting like she might say something, but she didn't. The silence after he finished was thick, suffocating. I stared at the table, tracing a scratch with my fingernail, and wondered how everything I'd held dear could unravel in one sentence. When life throws you a curveball, pause before you swing back. Sometimes silence is your strongest weapon. The park was a few blocks from our condo, a stretch of green tucked between office buildings and strip malls. I went there the next morning, the air crisp with early fall, leaves crunching under my boots. The benches were damp with dew, but I sat anyway, staring at the pond where ducks glided in lazy circles. I'd left the condo before Mark woke up, needing space to think, to breathe. My mind replayed his words on a loop, each repetition stoking the fire in my chest. By the time I got home, he was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. I didn't plan to shout. The words just spilled out, raw and jagged, as I stood there in my muddy boots. I told him the house wasn't his to give, that it was my inheritance, my memory, my right. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and explained it like I was a child, logical, cold. Sarah needed it more, he said. We had our condo, our life. Why cling to an old house? His certainty made me feel small, like my feelings were a footnote in his grand plan. I asked him when he'd stopped seeing me, really seeing me. He didn't answer, just looked away, and that silence was louder than anything he could have said. The argument stretched into the night, a tangle of hurt and frustration. I told him I couldn't live with someone who'd erase my voice so easily. He said I was overreacting, that I'd see his side eventually. But I didn't. I saw a man who'd built a wall between us, brick by brick, and that night, I knew I couldn't stay behind it anymore. Have you ever fought for something only to realize the real battle was for yourself? What did you learn? The new apartment was a shoebox on the edge of town, all beige walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. I packed my life into cardboard boxes, books, clothes, a few photos, and left the condo while Mark was at work. The movers hauled my things up 2 flights of stairs, their grunts echoing in the empty space. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by stacks, and felt the weight of starting over settle into my bones. No garden, no creaky floors, just a view of a parking lot and the hum of traffic outside. Leaving the house behind was harder than leaving Mark. I drove there one last time before the keys changed hands, walking through the rooms like a ghost. The kitchen still smelled of cedar, the living room still held that soft, worn couch where I'd read as a kid. I touched the walls, tracing the imperfections, and whispered goodbye to the memories I couldn't pack. Sarah would move in soon, her paints and easels claiming the space, and I wondered if she'd feel the history under her feet or just see a blank canvas. Back in the apartment, I unpacked alone, the silence pressing against my ears. The first night, I sat on the floor with a glass of wine, staring at the bare walls, and realized how alone I was, not just physically but deep in my core. The house was gone, Mark was gone, and I was left to figure out who I was without them. Starting over isn't a failure, it's a chance. Give yourself grace to feel the weight before you lift it. Sarah's art studio was a riot of color, tucked into a corner of the house she'd made her own. Canvases leaned against the walls, smeared with bold strokes of blue and red, and the air smelled of turpentine and coffee. I went there a week after the move, not sure what I wanted, answers, closure, maybe just to see her face. She stood by an easel, brush in hand, her blonde hair tied back with a scarf. The house around her was already shifting, her clutter filling the spaces I'd left empty, but it still felt like mine in the quiet corners. She didn't ask for the house, she told me that day, her voice soft under the hum of a fan. She'd been as shocked as I was when Mark suggested it, but she hadn't said no. She was drowning, she said, debts piling up, gigs drying out, and the house felt like a lifeline. Her eyes were wet when she offered to give it back, to undo the mess if she could. I shook my head, not because I didn't want it, but because I couldn't take it from her now. She wasn't the enemy, she was just Sarah, flawed and fumbling like me. Walking away, I felt lighter but also hollow. She wasn't the villain I'd painted her to be, and that made the hurt more complicated. The house was hers now, and I had to let it go, not just the deed, but the idea that it defined me. The roses would bloom for her, and I'd have to find my own garden. Have you ever blamed someone only to see their side later? How did it change your story? The community center smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, a low hum of voices filling the room. I'd signed up for a book club on a whim, desperate for something to fill the quiet. The first night, I sat in a folding chair, clutching a paperback I hadn't read, watching women my age filter in. Some tired, some laughing, all carrying their own invisible baggage. They welcomed me with nods and small smiles, no questions asked, and I felt a flicker of belonging I hadn't expected. Weeks turned into months, and those faces became lifelines. There was Lisa, a divorcee with a sharp wit who'd lost her home to a flood, and Tara, a nurse who'd buried her husband young. We'd sit in a circle, dissecting novels or sipping cheap wine, and I'd listen to their stories, messy, real like mine. They didn't fix me, but they held space for me, and that was enough. One night, Tara handed me a flyer for a gardening class, smirking as she said I needed dirt under my nails again. I laughed, the sound surprising me, and realized I was starting to heal. The apartment wasn't home yet, but it was mine. I hung a print on the wall, planted herbs on the windowsill, and felt the edges of myself soften. The house was a memory, but these women, this life, they were now. Surround yourself with people who see you, even when you can't see yourself. They're your mirror when you need one. The house looked different under Sarah's care, the porch freshly painted, her easels visible through the front window. I drove by one afternoon, not to stop, just to see. The roses were still there, wilder now, spilling over the fence, and I felt a tug in my chest. Loss, yes, but something else too. Sitting in my car, I let my mind wander back to Mark, to the years before the house tore us apart. There'd been signs I saw now, his decisions always final, his voice always louder. The house wasn't the start, it was the breaking point. I thought about the condo, how I'd molded myself to fit its clean lines, his schedule, his life. I'd lost pieces of myself there, long before he gave away the house. The betrayal wasn't just about brick and mortar, it was about trust, about being seen. Driving away, I realized the house had forced me to face what I'd ignored, that I'd been alone in that marriage far longer than I'd admitted. The reflection hurt, but it clarified things. I wasn't just mourning a home, I was mourning the version of me who'd stayed silent too long. The road ahead was mine to shape, and that was terrifying, but also free. Have you ever looked back and seen the cracks you missed? What did they teach you? The coffee shop was a hole-in-the-wall downtown, all mismatched chairs and chipped mugs. Mark texted me out of the blue, asking to meet, and I agreed, not for him but for me. He sat across from me, suit crisp, hair grayer than I remembered. His apology came slow, halting, like he wasn't sure how to mean it. He'd been wrong, he said, about the house, about us. He thought he was fixing something, but he'd broken more instead. I listened, stirring my coffee, feeling the anger I'd carried start to loosen. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Holding onto it was heavy, and I was tired of the weight. I told him I forgave him, my voice steady, but I didn't say we'd be okay. We wouldn't. The space between us was too wide now, carved by more than just a house. He nodded, eyes down, and we sat in silence until the coffee went cold. Walking out, I felt the air shift, lighter, cleaner. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to him, it was a door I opened for myself, a step toward letting go. Forgive when you're ready, not when they ask. It's your peace, not theirs. The apartment had become mine, piece by piece. A rug from a flea market, a shelf of books I'd actually read, a pot of basil thriving on the sill. I stood in the kitchen one morning, sunlight streaming through the window, and realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Mark, not for the house, not for anyone to tell me who I was. At 39, I was dating again, a quiet guy from the gardening class who liked my laugh. Work was steady, teaching kids who reminded me of my younger self, and the book club still met every Tuesday. I drove by the house sometimes, less often now, and it didn't sting as much. Sarah sent me a painting once, a swirl of reds and greens, the roses abstracted, and I hung it above my couch. The memories were mine, always would be, but they didn't own me anymore. I was alone, yes, but not lonely. The solitude had sharpened me, made me stronger, and I liked who I was becoming, flawed, fierce, free. The future wasn't a fairy tale, and I didn't want it to be. It was a blank page, and I was writing it, one messy, beautiful line at a time. Have you ever found yourself in the quiet? What did you build from it? As Emily stands in her small apartment, sunlight streaming through the window and a pot of basil thriving on the sill, she realizes that losing the house wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Her journey reminds us that sometimes, losing everything is the first step to finding ourselves. Through betrayal, she uncovered her own resilience. Through solitude, she built a life that was truly hers. Have you ever had to rebuild from the ground up? What did you discover about yourself in the process? If Emily's story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more tales of strength, betrayal, and the unexpected paths we take. At Whisper's Story, we bring you narratives that linger long after the screen goes dark, because every whisper has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you in the next one.